split really between your 9 to 16s is what we call the academy, the schoolboy age groups, and just below that we've got the pre-academy groups, which are under 7s and 8s. But yeah, in essence, attached to Morecambe FC is the academy. You have circa 150 players, I suppose. As I say, starting under 7s. The development centre sits outside of that, which is under 6 to 12s at the minute, which is another 75 players at the moment, in addition to all the academy groups. So yeah, it's quite a large entity, a lot of players involved, a lot of staff involved, a lot of hours, a lot of training sessions, a lot of games. But yeah, it's all aimed at trying to produce local homegrown talent, I suppose, that's going to push into the first team at the end of the day. And it's trying to get our brand and our staff seeing players at an earlier age. Instead of the sort of pre-academy stuff, the 6s, 7s, 8s, that's a couple of days a week, and a Saturday morning. The true academy players that sign to the football club start from under 9s. They train between Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They have a Saturday session, and the games programmes take place on a Sunday. We generally run extra games throughout the week in the evenings as well. And then the main, or I suppose the business end of stuff for the academy is the youth team, or the scholars, which is the under 19s group. So those boys are full time. They train 5 days a week, play on a Saturday morning. And then that's where the link into the first team comes really, where the first team staff will get to see players when they come in at 16s, and we start to highlight and sort of promote players who we think have got a good chance to progress to the first team. So yeah, it's certainly a busy and wide varied working week for the academy staff, and the players get sort of exposed to a lot of different experiences. But I think the key word there is experiences. I think everyone knows that the sort of rates of progression of players who come into academies who end up playing, well, certainly Premier League is very slim, even at our level. So players that come in at age 8 and 9, what's the chances of them playing for the first team at the end of the day? They're still very slim. So what we try and promote really is the experience and the time they have with us. So the Sunday games programme, which is the standard Football League one, is against our Cat 3 sides. You sort of your Prestons and your Blackpools, Fleetwoods, Walsall, Shrewsburys. But I think in order to test our better players, we do go and play against your sort of Category 1 sides, or as you say, your Evertons and Man Uniteds and Man Cities of this world. But yeah, I suppose it's to give them the experience of what football can be like, I suppose, away from what we can deliver. We aim to give, I say, as good an experience as we can, but to go away to places like the Man City Academy and play those teams and just see what life's like on the other side of football is for me is a valuable lesson for players and for staff, just to, I suppose, benchmark where our players are at and look at where they hopefully get to at the end of their journey. Man United's always been the sort of leader, hasn't it? You look at your class of '92, etc., and the amount of players they've brought through their system over the years. And I think it's almost been an added bonus at a lot of clubs that, yeah, it'd be lovely to get a local kid through to our first team, or to get players from our own academy through, but it's never necessarily been pushed. And I think Morecambe's probably been in that bracket as well over the last few years. And again, I suppose the difficulty with it is it's not easy. There's time and certain resources for these clubs that need to be put into the academy to make sure your recruitment's right, the coaching that they receive is right, to give them the best chance to try and progress into the first team here. So yeah, it's not an easy pathway certainly, and it takes time. So if we're signing boys at 7 and 8, it's a long time to leg and start playing for our first team. So yeah, it takes a great deal of patience, certainly a lot of planning and vision, and a lot of belief, I suppose, in what you're actually trying to achieve. And if the club or any club believe in trying to produce their own players, they need to put the effort and the resources into try and build the academy. It's part of our vision and strategy planning. It's based on 12-month stuff to 3 years and 5 years, and trying to work with the sort of players we identify at earlier age groups and sort of plot their progress, whether that's with us or whether the aim is ultimately sell players as well. It's the sort of dual roles with what we're trying to do. It's always, at our level, it's about resources and finance and balancing out. Do we need to try and bring in some finances by selling players at an earlier age, coupled with the fact we want to try and see more players playing in the first team arena. So it's always a balance in that, but it's about planning and having that ultimate vision of what you want to see in the future. I think because of the staff, we work with these players, as I say, if they're coming in at age 8 and 9, we get to work with them for 6, 7, 8 years. If they go on to Scholar, they could be with us for 10 years. So we know the players, we know their potential, we know the sort of levels that they could reach if they get the right support at the top end, which is 17s, 18s. Now for me, the next step is then what is put in place to make that happen. So once they get to sort of 16, 17, we might believe in them and we think they've got a chance to get into our first team, but then I suppose it goes out of our hands a little bit, and then it's whether it's education of the first team staff or whether it's first team staff buying into the academy setup, I suppose, and taking a vested interest in some of these players. And I'll go back to the word belief before as well. It's believing that players, again, it's not easy for first team managers to believe in a player that's 16, 17 and put the time and effort into them. But I said, we identify them and get them to a certain point, but then we need to pass them on, and that transition between an academy player and a first team player, I think, is probably where the club's at this moment in time, in terms of developing what happens to them when you get to 16, 17. First team like players, which is a situation right now, they like a number of players that we have, but what happens and what's the provision for those players once you get to 18, because they're not ready to play first team 20, 25 games over a season, but there's not necessarily the structures in place to allow them to progress to the full potential with us. It's a huge part of players, parents and staff's lives, these boys. Again, they could be in 4 times a week once you start getting towards the older age group, 15s, 16s, and then they could potentially be getting told at 16 that they're getting released by us. So it's a difficult process, certainly for staff having to tell players and forming relationships with them, and then potentially at the end of it them not getting anything with us. So yeah, it's very difficult. Again, go back to experience, and that for me is why the experience and the journey, that we like to call it, while they're with us, has to be a positive one, whether they're going to get something at the end of it ultimately or not. It's a matter of the process and enjoying the time with us is probably the most important thing. As I said before, it is difficult when players get to that age, and again, this isn't anything about Morecambe, it's probably a football-wide issue I think he's looking at, is what happens to players, the under 23 bracket so-called, and how do we best develop those players to be ready for the first team. Again, whether that's Man City or whether that's us, it's what happens to players, whether it's playing reserve team football against other under 23 outfits, or whether trying to experience football at non-league clubs and trying to get them ready. With the best will in the world, all players, well, the vast majority of players at age 18, 19 aren't ready for first team, but it's what happens to keep them developing. And one of the biggest issues from academy on to first team is first team's all about results at the end of the day. Academy is all about development, so players go from a developmental program into a results-driven business. So once first team players or academy players go into that first team setting, it's how do we keep developing those players and working on the areas that they still need to work on. For me, it's a massive part. We have sort of player pathway that we look at of little points along their 2-year journey as full-time scholars that they should try and hit, and for me, this work experience route that we have for under 18s is really important. As I say, it's easy. Once you go from being a scholar into the first team, just training with scholars and then going in with first team, it's great. You get your kit, you get your bag, you get your pro contracts. All of a sudden you think you're first team footballers. But to go out, as Keelan's doing with Kendall, to experience non-league football, as most of us know, is completely different to what happens here at first team level. And to experience a crowd around the pitch, not always positive, give them a little bit of stick in a hostile environment where it is a results-driven business. And to get that experience as a 17, 18-year-old for me is really important, and almost gets them ready, more ready for first team action. Again, a lot of the sort of talking youth development is about individualised plans and taking each player as an individual. Each player is different. So if we have a player who's sort of 17, 18 looking at first team contract-wise, who's a lot smaller than somebody else, you might need to look at a different development plan for them against somebody who's big physical, strong centre half who will do them some good to go out and play at non-league level. So it's difficult. You have to take each kid, I suppose, or each player as an individual case and see what's best for them. But for me, if you're going to try and get to a first team at Morecambe, you need to experience that first team setting. And in a way, going out on loan and playing at a non-league club almost shortens that time for players to understand what it takes to play at a first team environment. Yeah, it's great. It's worked really well for the academy. We've been there getting on with 2022 now, so that's 5 years we've been down there as a facilities provider and partner with the college. So it's worked really well for us. We've built year on year on some of the little tweaks we've had and getting extra access to certain areas and grass pitches, trying to improve the quality of them. At the end of the day, both the academy and the first team would love a purpose-built training facility which is just there for us, but the sort of position that we're in at this moment in time, I think it's working really well, and to have the first team down, again, I say, just aids that transition between the full-time scholars being seen by first team staff, for scholars to be able to watch sessions, watch the intensity of sessions, watch the quality of player, even the instructions and the tactics that are coming out from the first team staff, and the way it gets delivered compared to the academy staff is all valuable learning. For any club, whether it's your League 2, League 1 or Championship, you have your two aims. You're trying to produce players for your first team, but there's also players you're trying to sell on and produce finance for the club as well. So it's hugely important that you have a good relationship, good working relationship with the first team staff. They need to understand where we're coming from as academy, what our aims and objectives we have, and obviously we need to fit into what the first team's plans are and understand the different pressures that are sort of put on first team staff. So, but no, it's certainly been a very positive relationship, I think. It's fair to say this season so far, and we seem to be getting a lot better understanding of what they're looking for from the players when they go into them. I think the departments are working a lot closer than in previous seasons, so the sports science department, the academy are liaising with Chris at first team level, because obviously the biggest thing is physicality when players are moving from academy into first team, so it's trying to put plans in place at an earlier stage so players are sort of ready quicker for first team football. So no, again, there's always things you can put in place to make things better, but no, it's been really positive so far. And again, it's strange for our position, obviously, we're working for the football club, but our role is to develop players. Now, depending what goes on at sort of boardroom level or at first team management level, we're still producing players or we're still developing players. Now, that just changes depending on what type of first team staff or what outlook the first team have with the academy. If they're really buying in and trying to want to produce players from homegrown, then that's great, we link in and we liaise with them. If they don't, then we're still having duty bound to produce pathways and progression for those players. So for us, it's either pushing them into our first team, or when they come to the end of the journey with us, it's making sure that we can find their next steps with other clubs. So it's a never-ending conveyor belt, really.